I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. I'm here today with Adam Keown, Global CISO at Eastman, a Fortune 500 company based in Kingsport, Tennessee. Evolution Equity TV is brought to you by Evolution Equity Partners, an international venture capital investor partnering with exceptional entrepreneurs to develop market-leading cybersecurity and enterprise software companies. To learn more about Evolution Equity Partners, visit evolutionequity.com. Adam, welcome. Thank you for joining us again today.
Thank you for the invite.
So the last time we were on with each other, Adam, you said I can ask you anything. I'm going to take you up on that. It took me a couple of weeks to think this through. And what I'd really like to know is what runs through your mind when you first learn about some of the large cyber attacks and data breaches. And before I dig in and single some of those out, where do you find out about them? What are your sources? Are you online? Are you reading? Does your staff come to you? Do you subscribe to certain, daily feeds?
My first answer is my thoughts go to all the people that are hurting or helping in that situation. That's something that I learned as a young kid, that when any kind of tough situation comes about, you need to focus on the people that are helping and hurting. The second part is around all of the information that I regularly get related to cybersecurity comes from every single source that you just mentioned. So I've got team members that reach out. They say, "Have you seen this yet?" I personally feel like I grew up in cybersecurity, so I've got feeds and podcasts that I listen to, and some that I review every single day.
So let's dig in here. There are three in particular I want to ask you about. Certainly there's a whole lot more than that, but these three in particular were all over the media. I'm going to start out with the MGM Resorts Hack. I remember ingesting this information, very quickly. There were news stories coming out day after day. We learned more and more about it. At first, it was reported that the company, suffered a loss in the neighborhood of $100 million. And I guess that was after they completed their investigation. But what really jumped out at me, Adam, was that numerous sources reported, and this was afterwards, so this was a month or two afterwards, that the help desk at MGM suffered a social engineering hack on a couple of their employees, which led to the credentials for several of their higher ranking employees being exposed. So tell me what you remember about that.
Hackers are always going to try the least resistive method or the easiest way to get in. So you've got different flavors per se of hackers out there, and you've got some that are very experienced in social engineering activities, and they can get a lot done. And then you've got others who may not have those kind of social skills, and they want to focus on more of the actual hacking that we traditionally think of as a vulnerability in a server or a vulnerability in a website or database that they can get into.
So the next one, Adam, is Change Healthcare, and you're not in cyber if you're not aware of this. A New York Times headline, I think, said it all. Cyber attack paralyzes the largest U.S. healthcare system. My mind immediately goes to patients and people who are suffering. You mentioned that, but at the same time, the monetary losses were enormous because so many other organizations were affected, and it quickly went from 100 million. CBS News had reported on it. And then Forbes followed with a story, I think about a month later, estimating losses in the $1 billion range. It's just a staggering amount of money.
It is staggering, but you also have to look at money like that in ratios. If I'm remembering correctly, Change Healthcare had over $371 billion in revenue in 2023. When you talk about SEC filings and material events and all of these items, I believe 100% that is a material event. At the same time, you have to put it in comparison to the impact on the company as a whole. The companies that I've worked with in the past, and even here today, we're always going to look at, did two PCs become infected? Did 1,000 become infected, or did 10,000 become infected? Because those play out differently on how you're going to handle it, not only with regulatory requirements, but also in your incident response plan.
And just to clarify, Adam, the numbers that I quoted, those are healthcare providers. So it wasn't just Change Healthcare, but all of the other companies who were impacted and involved. And I had a flashback with Change Healthcare. In a lot of ways, we talk about supply chain attacks, and that's modern language, as if this is something new. But I was thinking back to the early 90s with the advent of the internet. And there was a time before that when companies didn't take viruses very seriously. Most large organizations wouldn't even have an enterprise license to combat PC-based viruses because they were limited to desktop machines. And once these big companies started connecting up to the internet, that became almost like the airplane for the human viruses. Now companies started to infect each other, and that was what propelled the antivirus industry. It was, this idea that one company could infect another company, which would infect another company, and there was just a chain. So, that concept goes back a while, except, we didn't call it supply chain back at that time.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It propelled everyone, and I'll go ahead and throw out the days when I was combating NIMDA and the Melissa or the MS Blaster worm. Those were some very exciting times learning how these brand new viruses on the scene would react. And at the same time, I saw a recent article that said if you put where they did a test, and NIMDA is still out there, Code Red is still out there, and so if you put a server blatantly on the internet, it's going to still be infected with those devices because there's many countries that are still very far behind, and I'm sure there's some still in the US too, but many that are still far behind and are running these machines out there because if the machine is working, many companies say leave it alone. Don't mess with it as long as it's still working.
What does this do to the CISO mindset, Adam? I mean, it wasn't long ago we were reading about Syncora, it was headlines, they suffered a cyber attack. And then less than 30 days later, we had a dozen major pharma companies come out and announce that they were hit. And what do you do in between that? Or are you just waiting for, the domino effect? It's got to be a very scary thing for the CISOs.
It is, but there's tried and true things that we're always going to stick to. Are we checking for the latest indicators of compromise? Are we checking our threat feeds for additional information on where they may be going? Is there algorithms for new domains that are being set up that we can block ahead of time? Those type of ingenuity and forward thinking is what helps keep us ahead of the line and be able to at least take on some of these major events. At the same time, we don't want to leave out the compliance and regulatory side of this. That's always ringing in the back of the mind of every CISO. Am I meeting all of the regulatory requirements? Am I notifying the appropriate folks? What team members do I need to help me do this? And I'm pleasantly surprised to say that the White House actually released a document lately about harmonizing the cybersecurity regulatory market in the United States. And it's an exciting opportunity, and I hope that it gains some traction and moves forward.
So I don't know if I've saved the best or the worst for last, but the last one that I want to ask you about is MoveIt. And I remember this, Adam. I mean, I think it was on a daily basis. We were finding out about dozens of companies day after day after day. This thing just grew. Ultimately, I believe somewhere in the range of 3,000 organizations were affected. 70 some odd million people were impacted by the MoveIt carnage. Progress Software is the owner of that MoveIt platform. I think most people know that by now. Company faced an investigation from the SEC. I think we're still waiting to really truly understand, what happened. But what were you thinking? Not when you first heard about MoveIt, but when you started to see the number of companies that were being affected.
First off, the number of companies that we know were affected are the numbers that you gave. I believe there's many more out there because, those are the only ones reported. And as a FBI agent in the past, even the numbers the FBI currently still reports are just are just the folks who went to them or somehow went through ic3.gov. I always want to keep in mind that's a subset of the numbers, of the actual numbers that are out there. But with that being said, I continue to think, what is the next big area that some of these highly intelligent attackers have not looked at yet? And this file change, sharing area, that was the chapter for MoveIt, and many of the others have been looked at since then. In the last, 6 to 8 months, we've seen a huge emphasis on VPN activity and attackers going after global VPNs to try to break in, or even stuffing credentials that they've gotten from other websites. The digital landscape is so broad and wide that there are new areas every day where our data is being put, whether it's in Gen AI or whether it's a new app on our cell phone. As we've discussed before, the amount of cyber crime defenders that are out there is just not enough yet to keep up with the market and to help us look in all of these nook and crannies to figure out where the attacks are going to occur. So that's my immediate thought is, what's the next area that we haven't looked at yet that someone's going to find something that they didn't realize?
So we talked about three major hacks, Adam, that affected so many more organizations than the initial victim. Nowadays, are cybersecurity teams discussing cyber attacks with their CISOs that didn't hit them directly? Is that more of a talking point when you see these major hacks? Are you talking to your team, or other CISOs talking to their teams?
100%, and that has been happening for years. When we see these attacks, it is, regularly talking about it amongst ourselves to find out, what have we done? Is there steps that we can take with VMware, because the latest VMware breach is out there, to also defend ourselves. And then we're also looking at the old tried and true security layers. If they don't have a patch, where is an area that we can actually change today that will either mitigate or completely prevent that type of attack from occurring? And then, of course, areas like monitoring. If we can't patch it today, how can we monitor to see if there's rogue activity occurring? So we have those all the time. And then in the CISO circles, we're having the same discussions, sometimes at that tactical level for some of the more technical CISO groups that I'm a part of, but also at the strategic level. Are we approaching areas like identity management the right way? And my answer is no. I think we've spent the last 10 to 15 years in more of a defensive, operational, detecting the phishing, doing incident response. Now we have to spend the next 10 or 15 years probably focused on identity management and anomaly detection in that area. So it's those type of strategy discussions that also occur in the CISO circles.
So before I let you go, Adam, I have to ask, are CISOs getting phone calls, emails, contacted by their CEO, boardroom executives, when they see some of these major hacks that don't hit them necessarily, but the magnitude of it, scares them, and wants to know, hey, are we aware of this? Are we okay?
Yes, 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 and yes. So all of those people are reaching out to their CISOs regularly, and sometimes it's more tame is probably the better word. It's, hey, here's an article. What do you think about it? Sometimes it's also, I know that this application is in our environment, and I want to make sure I get a full write up on how we're defending against it and making sure that we don't become that next victim.
And I'm sure it's particularly scary when companies in an industry. So you see, a dozen pharmaceutical companies, come forward in a short period of time, and you're a pharma company who maybe hasn't been hit yet. That's got to be quite concerning.
It is, especially when your industry partners have had an issue going on. I mean, you look at ransomware attacks in the last 8 years, and there's a beautiful visual of them on Information is Beautiful website. And all the ransomware attacks, 8 to 4 years ago, were seemed to be targeting these large, big companies and such. But now the frequency has gone way up on the number of attacks, but they're much smaller attacks that have been occurring against say $500 million companies or $100 million companies. And once they realize that they can get a foothold or a specific catch into an industry, then they're able to turn around and use that. I mean, what was it just last year that some of the ransomware groups said, "Oh, we won't go after hospitals." And now for the last 12 months, we've seen hospitals just raked across the coals, and because they've taken the gloves off.
Yeah, and K through 12 schools have been hammered, and they don't have the resources, people, money. Yeah. Well, Adam, I appreciate you coming on and unpacking some of these major hacks, and look forward to continuing the conversation with you soon.
Great. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute, and hopefully someone walks away with some learning in this conversation.
I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. Evolution Equity TV is brought to you by Evolution Equity Partners, an international venture capital investor partnering with exceptional entrepreneurs to develop market-leading cybersecurity and enterprise software companies. Visit evolutionequity.com to learn more. You can keep up with all of our media at cybercrimemagazine.com.